على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وعلى كل من تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. سبحانك اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا أنت العليم الحكيم. وبعد. Lesson number 5 of term 1. Here with our study of the fiqh of sales, business transactions. As you can imagine, this topic is a very vast and very detailed topic. This is the 2 volumes of Kitab al-Thmani, Fiqh al-Buyu. Have you got the same copy, or
yeah,
is it a new Qalam print? Which is this is published from Pakistan, but the other one is published from Jeddah, which is a better print. So there's lots of things. And then we've got this Mukhtasar al-Quduri in front of us. You see, the point is that, the classical texts, sometimes it's easier learning from a modern book than classical texts to understand. But we need to always attach ourselves to classical texts, so that's why I'm trying to combine between the two. Because they were written in a particular time and context and era. So sometimes some of the wordings, like, for example, he's going to mention soon that if somebody sells grain and things like that. But anyway, and also, secondly, I've been in 2 minds about how much in detail to go into. Like some of the things we're going to discuss today. If you go into all the details that are in this book's not been translated into English, but all the details, it can get very long. I mean, I wouldn't go into every single detail, because lots of things I just give you the summary of. But still, even the summary of all the topics in itself is quite long as well. So I'm thinking, should I miss some things out? But then there's a lot of modern issues. I think everybody would like to know those modern issues, isn't it? It's better not to, even if it takes time and we go slowly. Is that okay with everybody? Because there's lots of things. So anyway, in the previous lesson, we've been talking about this whole ijab qabul issue. And we're coming to the end of ijab qabul. There's only one last issue left with ijab qabul. And then we'll get into the next part. If you remember that the integrals of a sale, ijab and qabul, the initiation of the sale, I like to translate ijab as initiation now, rather than offer. Normally everyone translates it as offer and acceptance, because like I mentioned, offer gives an indication that it's just a suggestion, negotiation. Ijab and qabul are 2 decisive statements or phrases or actions of sale. Before that, all the different discussions of consideration, etc., they're not part of ijab qabul. Like 2 people are talking, one says, would you consider buying my phone for £50? The other one says, yeah, he just says yes. That's not ijab qabul. Somebody asked this, actually, that does it happen even with marriage? A lot of people ask, oh, would you marry me? I would marry you. Jokingly, people say that. Some people ask that they were at university or school or college or somewhere, and they just said this, are you married now? Does he have to give me talaq? So many young people ask this, and they have waswasa that I think we've been married to it, and there was people there, they were just sitting there. It doesn't happen that easily in nikah as well. So, for example, a man says to a woman that if I was to propose, or not even that, just say, would you consider marrying me? And she says, yeah, I'll definitely marry you. So that's not nikah. That's just asking that if I was to now officially propose and then talk to your father and then engagement will be done, etc. And then in the marriage contract will be ijab and qabul. I am marrying you, I have married you, with that intention as well. So it's a very decisive type of statement, ijab qabul. Anyway, so we looked at ijab qabul in detail with all the different aspects relating to it. And if you remember that the arkan, the integrals of a valid sale, what are they? Ijab qabul. And in order for a proper sale to take place, is ijab qabul, and what else do you require?
Action.
Sorry?
Action.
No.
Item.
Yeah, the item, and there's one last thing left. If you have ijab qabul and the item and the price, these are the integrals. Normally, the Hanafis say ijab qabul. That's it. That a sale will be concluded. Why they say that is because sometimes you don't need, the actual item in front of you. But when we look at it overall, a sale, whether the item is there or not, when we look at what has to be present, then we say ijab qabul. Because the price can be delayed sometimes. You're not giving the money right now. Sometimes the mabi' is delayed, the price is given, but the item is given later. So that's why when the Hanafis say that ijab and qabul are the only integrals, which means that those things that are required there in the gathering. Like in marriage as well, I mentioned, ijab and qabul are only necessary. The boy and the girl, both of them are not there. The representatives are there. So this is what the Hanafi scholars mean, that ijab and qabul is to do with what's needed there and then. But in order for a sale to take place, then you need ijab qabul, and the other two important aspects are the item of sale, known as mabi', and thaman, which means the price. Now we're going to look at, after this last bit about ijab and qabul, because we've been talking about ijab and qabul, and before we get into the next section of hududi, because that's talking about the mabi', the item, so I want to go into the details of the mabi', and then we'll talk about the details of the thaman, the price. There are rules relating to both in quite a lot of detail. So with regards to ijab qabul, we read here that bay is concluded with this initiation, offer initiation, and then we said that there was khiyarul qabul, the option to accept or not in the gathering. The other person can reject it. Whoever stands up or shows any expression of rejection, then the ijab becomes batil. And once the ijab and qabul have taken place, then that sale becomes necessary, and there is no option to cancel in the gathering. Remember that point I explained in detail. Unless, he said, unless there is an aib, a defect, or you haven't seen, and for that there'll be an option. We'll talk about that later. So we looked at a lot of things concerning ijab and qabul. Yeah, you remember all of them? You should go over those things as well. All those things. Last week I recapped them. Those right in the beginning, so I'm not going to go over them again. Just in the last session, we looked at ta'ati, and we looked at just getting something from someone and then paying, slowly, and those kind of things. Okay. Now, last issue relating to ijab and qabul is what we call wa'd and promise. A sale is when it takes place halan, currently. Like marriage. Promising to marry is what? Engagement. It's a wa'd. It's called wa'd. You're just promising. Both parties are promising one another that on 10th of July we will marry one another. So it's not, engagement is not marriage. So likewise here in sale as well, there's something called promising to buy and sell. Like I say to you that, okay, I'll sell you this phone of mine next week on this date, and you promise that you will buy it. So that's a promise. It's not a sale. Normally, bay' al-mustaqbil is not allowed. So what's not allowed, according to everybody, based on the hadiths, to attribute a sale to the future. So basically, you are doing ijab, qabul, and buying and selling and saying, I sell you this, I sell you this, I buy you this, and this sale will take place on 10th of July. There's a difference between promise and the sale being attributed to the future. Do you understand the difference? The sale being attributed to the future is that we're buying and selling, it's done. It will automatically take place on 10th of July. So there's no new ijab and qabul on 10th of July. Today, I sell you, I have accepted it. I sell you it for the 10th of July. I have accepted it for the 10th of July. That's different to, I will sell you on 10th of July. Now, I might not go ahead with that offer, and the other person might turn away from the acceptance. This is a massive issue discussed in many, many books, and I think probably one of the Mufti Taqi Uthmani is the one who's probably tackled this issue in the most depth from all the different current day scholars because of Islamic banking as well. It deals a lot with promise. He's dealt with the issue in a lot of detail, and all the Islamic Fiqh Academy as well, they've got a lot of this stuff from him. So anyway, the first point here to understand is that there's a difference between a sale enacted for the future and a promise to buy and sell in the future. Sale enacted for the future, I sell you this for £10, which will take place on the 10th of July. I sell you this for £10 for the 10th of July. I accept this for the 10th of July. So automatically 10th of July, that sale will come into existence and take place. That's not allowed, it's haram. Bay' in the future is not allowed at all. So that's not allowed. Now the issue is that what's the hukam of promising, whether it's a unilateral promise, which is called wa'd, one-sided promise, or muwa'ada. حكم البيع حكم الوعد أو المواعدة في البيع. The ruling of one-sided promise or both-sided, unilateral or bilateral promise in bay'. Unilateral means what? One of them promises that I will sell you, the other one hasn't promised to buy, or one of them promises to buy but the other one hasn't promised to sell. The hukam of that, and the other issue is both are promising, the buyer promising to buy, the seller promising to sell. Do you understand? To understand this, again going back to this point that you can't do it in the future, to put it in a different way, is that we read البيع ينعقد بالإيجاب والقبول إذا كان بلفظ الماضي. Remember? Bay' takes place only if it's with past tense words. And I mentioned that the reason in Arabic it has to be past tense because it can't be future tense. Remember we mentioned that it has to be past tense or present tense. That's why other than Arabic it doesn't have to be past tense, because mudari' in Arabic means I am buying and I will buy. Anything which is I will buy is not a bay'. So if, for example, someone says that I will sell you this or I will buy you this, this is not a sale. That's not a sale. Now, if someone promises to initiate a sale in the future, what's the ruling of this? Is it necessary to fulfill this or not necessary to fulfill? What about turning? And the same ruling, the same issue is with engagement and marriages. People don't take that seriously. Now, there's a lot of lengthy discussion, and here we don't need to go into too much, all the details that I mentioned here and the various books. There's a discussion here only about the discussion which we need to know about here is that there's one aspect which is the diyanatan aspect. Remember we mentioned this diyanatan and qada'an. What's a diyanatan aspect? Religiously, between you and Allah. And one is the qada'an in a court of law aspect. If you say something is necessarily diyanatan but can't be enforced in a court of law. So if I, like for example in engagement, it's a complete agreement that it's diyanatan fardan wajib to fulfill the promise, but not qada'an. You can't take, if you were engaged and the other party halfway through engagement said, "Oh, we don't want to carry on," and you've broken off the engagement. You can't go to the court and force them to marry the daughter to the son, etc. If you say qada'an is necessary, then you can actually literally go to the courts and force them to carry on with that with that engagement, marriage engagement. So the question is that Diyanatan, the issue is Diyanatan is completely agreed upon by everybody that a promise to buy and sell in the future is a religious responsibility, like a massive responsibility. Mr. Uthmani here in Fiqh al-Buyu' he's actually gone into a lot of detail mentioning, that so this is something which is really in, commanded by the Quran and Sunnah, like a lot of emphasis in the Quran and Sunnah to fulfill your promise, and to go against promise is great sin. Allah says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu awfu bil uqud, first verse of Surah Al-Ma'idah. O you who believe, fulfill your uqud and promises. لِمَ تَقُولُونَ مَا لَا تَفْعَلُونَ, why are you saying what you don't do? The commentators have mentioned as well that this is to do with people making promises and then not fulfilling those promises. I once gave a whole talk in America, I remember, just 1 hour lecture. It's on YouTube somewhere. And Dar es Salaam, the fiqh of promises. There's a lot relating to promise. And the worst is when someone makes a promise and at the time of making the promise makes an intention that I'm not going to fulfill this promise. That's the worst sin. So someone says, I'll come to your house tomorrow, and then inside, and I'm not going to go. That's a major, major harm. The hadith are like ayatul munafiqi thalathun, sign of a hypocrite of 3. One of them is وَإِذَا وَعَدَ أَخْلَفَ, if you make a promise, you go against the promise. Like it's a really promise to the point that Abu Sufyan radiallahu anhu, in the hadith of Hiraql, when he was asked about the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he wasn't a Muslim that time, and he was asked about him, and he said all the truthful, all the things which were truthful about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he was truthful. So when Hiraql asked him, tell me all the basic things that he commands, like this is the messenger who's come, like what is he telling you? So the list he said, he tells us salah, sidq, afaf, wafa bil ahd, wa ada il amana. His basic teachings are offer salah, be truthful, and fulfill your promises, and give amana, trust to people. So this shows that this is how a Muslim is recognized. Like the basic teachings of the Prophet ﷺ is fulfilling a wa'ad, and going against a wa'ad is like a major, from the absolute kaba'ir sins. It's like a massive sin. People don't take it seriously. There's a hadith, لا تماري أخاك ولا تعده موعدة فتخلفه لا إيمان لمن لا أمانة له ولا دين لمن لا عهد له. So he says there are so many verses of the Quran and so many hadith that leave no doubt that fulfilling a promise is wajib, diyanatan, according to between you and Allah, and to go against this is a massive sin, unless someone has a proper accepted excuse, a valid excuse, not makes one up. Just if someone has a valid excuse, then it is permissible to go against the promise, but there has to be udhr maqbool, halatul udhr. Otherwise the person is sinful. Okay, so when it comes to promising to buy and sell, unless someone has a valid excuse, that person has to, between him and Allah, go ahead and fulfill that promise. I'll sell you my car 3 months. People just take this. They found someone else giving a bit, £2.50 more. They'll break that promise, commit major haram, like a massive haram. It's as bad as drinking alcohol and zina, if not worse. Because just for another £5.50. Some uncle giving another £5.50. You promise someone to sell, that I will sell you, and just because someone's giving a bit more, the guy just breaks his promise. That's really bad. Yeah.
Does that include your promise to Allah?
Of course, starts off with promise to Allah, definitely.
So if you promise not to do a sin, but then you do the sin.
Of course, the tawbah, but the sin in itself is a sin, is another sin as well. So there's two sins there. You shouldn't be doing that sin anyway. You don't need to promise to Allah that Allah, I won't be doing that sin.
Why is it double punishment?
I've got that talk on YouTube. If you have a chance sometime, maybe I think it's audio. I think we did put it up. There,
I can just take it. There's nothing in the title.
promise.
Fiqh promises.
No, not fiqh promise. Just promise. Obeying the law of the land, and all these things were discussed in there. I gave like a 1 hour talk. Darus Salam. When I went to Chicago, I remember I gave a talk in Chicago and Darus Salam. I don't think we put it on YouTube. They recorded it. I know. I think they put it up online 2 years ago. It starts off with promise with Allah. I mentioned this promise with Allah explanation and promise. So anyway, what do we understand? That fulfilling a promise is necessary, wajib diyanatan, for sure. Okay. As far as the halatul udhr is concerned, then we said it's permissible. So, for example, in a marriage engagement, if there's a genuine excuse, you found something or you couldn't go ahead because of genuine excuse, then it's okay, and you can break that promise. And that's also taken from the hadith of Aisha radiallahu anhu. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was promised by Jibreel that he's going to come at this time, and then he didn't come at that time. And so, based on that hadith, there was a reason. Anyway, so Imam Ghazali says as well, he says, Al-afatu thalitha ashara, the 13th calamity of the tongue, making a promise which is a false promise. So anyway, this is all diyanat. Yeah.
On that, selling things in the future. So it's something, if you pre-order something, that's going to be released in 2 weeks' time. Is that a promise or is that a sale?
No, you're paying right now. Are you paying right now? The money is going now.
I don't think paying right now. I think
Sometimes you pay on delivery.
Yeah. So then that would be like a promise. Then, if no one's paying nothing, then it's like it's a promise. A bay' can only happen if it's taken place right now. That's a sale. If it takes place currently. If it's in the future, then that is really like a promise.
But then, do you know how you said about the bait? It doesn't necessarily mean the exchange of goods at that point anyway.
Mm.
But the sale is still deemed to be a sale at that point. So, if that's the case, where you don't have to have the exchange of goods.
But the problem there's another thing is bay'u dayn bid-dayn, which is a sale of debt for debt is haram as well in Islam. One party has to give one thing. If both parties do it, like both of them have not got something which is a debt on each other. Bay'u gali bil-gali or bay'u dayn bid-dayn, it's known as in the hadith. So the person giving the item, that's a debt. And the person giving the money, that's a debt. So one party should be giving. But we'll talk about this a bit more in detail because we're going to talk about salam and istisna and things like that. Where you can't have no one giving any item. You have to have one person giving something. So it could be either the mabi' or it could be either the money. Either one of them could be given later. But both being given later, that's problematic.
But that's what tends to happen in the internet sales. Both are done later.
Normally the money is paid.
Not anymore as well. Now a lot of by Amazon, for instance, they only take the money once.
No, so they
Dispatch.
contact you to take the money.
It
Just goes automatically.
goes automatically, but it
Yeah,
happens
but
later.
you've kind of given it.
You've given permission to take it. I
Yeah,
guess. So at
so,
that
yeah,
point,
so
then
that's different.
they've got access to
Yeah,
it. I
so
guess.
that means from your side it's gone.
Yeah. Whether it's
Whether they take it, you just say that okay, the money is here. When you come and give it, you just like you leave a box outside your house, for example, with money in there. They come and give the item and take the money. If they wanted to take it early, they could have taken it earlier. They could have taken it later. So that's different. You've given it.
But if you pay on delivery, which is later,
Yeah. If it's a proper agreement, pay on delivery. That you don't pay now, they can't ask from it. They can't ask for the money from you now. Then that's either a promise or it's not allowed as a sale. What about if pay on delivery? If, for example, halfway through before the delivery, it's 2 weeks is delivery. After 1 week, you change your mind. But I don't want to go ahead. What happens?
they said there's like
You have a car.
there's 2 or 3 days
Or
or
it's
hours
dispatched.
when they say that it's dispatched, then they say you can't cancel the order. Until that point, you can cancel.
Yeah, so basically they're saying that dispatch, meaning that they've given the item.
From that point, they incur the cost of sending the item to you. From that
Yeah,
point.
that's another discussion as well. That if something happens to the item in the middle, who's responsible for it? Whose is it? Is the wakil yours or is the wakil theirs? So that's a big discussion as well, which needs to be. And we will talk about that as well.
It's quite
That's
so
good.
even like so. What about the future? Like say you're gonna get your boiler serviced by British Gas or something. You're saying I'm gonna do it on the date, on a certain date. Isn't that you're making that sale at that point? Saying, but then they're gonna come to do the service and you're gonna pay them 30 days later.
No, but that's a promise. If you don't pay now, that's a promise. Okay, you agree. These are all promises. That you agree that okay, on this day this thing will happen. Somebody says that I will come to your house and paint. Okay, and you agree. You make an order. You make a request. You arrange. And they agree. You sign on a contract or whatever. That on after 30 days, 20 days, see agreements. Okay, 25th of November is when I'll come and paint your house, and you're not paying. So that's basically a promise. I'm going to mention the ruling of the promise, but it's a promise.
You know, in many cases where you pay a deposit now and you're less than completion, there's all sorts of transactions now that happen.
The deposit you're paying a bit now is that if it's a small amount going towards it, and that's like you're paying towards it, isn't it? If it's a deposit, if it's just a deposit, they give you that deposit back. Then again, it's just a deposit for the promise.
There could be some cases that if you change your mind later on, you lose the deposit.
There's a whole another ruling. Deposit, the fiqh of deposit is something else.
Unless you say if it's a part payment or is it a deposit.
The fiqh of deposit generally, there's lots of things. I've got a whole like 6-7 pages on deposit. Deposits are not allowed, but in the current day, it can be allowed in a certain way. So there's lots of things, but they will all come. We've got about 800 pages. Each 800 pages might take 5 years with all discussing all these issues. So you were saying something? Okay. Let me just finish this topic off, then we'll see. So what was I saying? The promise. So the promise, so far we said, if there's a promise, then it is necessary to fulfill it diyanatan, from a religious point of view, meaning from between the person and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the Maliki madhab, there's actually a bit of discussion in the Maliki madhab. They say that look, if it's a promise that required you to incur something to do, which you put effort in, and somebody ordered something that I'll buy this from you, and because of that you went to the place and you bought and you spent money and you put effort and things like that, then in that case it's sinful if the other person breaks the promise and you can take them to the courts, etc. If not, then there isn't. So there's a whole discussion, but let me mention the summary of it. Example, like for example, if someone says that, look, not even a sale, go for Hajj, I'll give you loan, and he left for Hajj. Then he says, okay, I'm not giving you a loan again. Or just break your house, اهدم دارك وأنا أقرضك, and I'll give you. Or better example, تزوج امرأة, marry this woman, and all your costs I'll give you. He went and then the nikah and says, okay, give me the cost now, I need to do the walima, etc. No, I'm not giving you. So a lot of people make promises and the other person engages into things because of which then he incurs costs. So anyway, the summary of this, like I said, that between him and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, definitely it's necessary to fulfill the promise. However, qada'an, we said diyanatan and qada'an. The normal general ruling in regards to qada'an means legally, is that it cannot be enforced in courts of law. That's the general rule. That because otherwise, like I said, you take the engagement, the person who broke off an engagement, marriage engagement, you take them to the courts. Nobody says that that's allowed. So the default, normal, basic ruling is that promises are binding religiously, but not binding legally in a court of law. Because the court of law, it's not their domain to enter people, what they say and what they promise each other. I promise you that I'll come to your house tomorrow, and then if I don't come, you take me to the courts. And someone says I'll be bringing you food tomorrow. So these are promises between people, because we're not just talking about sale promises. So generally, the rule is that this is a religious ruling, and you can't say that all types of promises should be legally enforced. However, even things like if someone says, I'll give you a gift, I'll give you a hadiah, I'll give you a loan, I'll do this for you, I'll paint your house for you, I'll help you, I'll give you a lift. These are all personal promises. However, the classical fuqaha say that this is the basic ruling, despite that there are certain cases in which certain halat, in which promises will be binding legally. Because going against that promise in those cases result in a clear and apparent and extreme harm to the one who was made this promise. In other cases, it's emotional, etc. Emotionally you feel bad, someone promised you something, so not that. This is clear. So like I said, if somebody promised that I'll buy something from you, from a tajir, from a businessman, order was given. Someone orders, says, makes imagine in this day and age, 200,000, 300,000 pounds, they place an order, and you start getting all the things from your supplies, etc. And this happens between Muslims. I remember a case here, two Muslims, both jubba wearing, dari growing, beard growing, these people, they're both, and it was some 80,000 pounds worth of something. And so they promised that they'll, two factories here in Leicester, many other factories or whatever they do. So one of them promised, and then these guys ordered from China or whatever they ordered or something, and then the other party says, we don't want it anymore. They're having a massive dispute, and they're both doing itikaf and khatmi khajgans and because Islam is only khatmi khajgan for many people. When it comes to the markets and the place and the factories, then Islam is not there, of course. So imagine, this other person already started work on getting the goods from China or Dubai or whatever. And he tried to cancel, but those other people are not cancelling. So you have to pay, we're going to take you to courts. And these two, they were Muslims, they did it privately. Brother, whatever. The company that he's sort of got all the goods from, he has to pay them. Whatever money he has to pay. And these two, they just did it it was just a verbal promise. Now that's when they come to the mufti. They can't go to the court. It was just a verbal promise. That okay, yeah, we want this, and just get it, and this, and then they're friends. And now they're just saying no, but no, we can't do it now, and this and that is difficult, and it's a big issue, especially when you're talking about 70, 80, 100,000 pounds. So therefore, in such cases where there's clear, especially financial harm to the other party, then in this case, that promise will be enforced in a court of law if you can take it in the court of law. If you can't take it in the court of law, then you can't do nothing about it. Then it's just that the person will be sinful between them and Allah. But this is why it's necessary or it's good to sort of have things in writing so you can take it in the court of law. تجعل المواعيد لازمة لحاجة الناس. Abdin says. Sometimes promises are made necessary through a court of law basically due to the needs of the people. Because the harms could be like here the Qasmani says that, for example, it could be goods that nobody else is going to buy it. There's very few people who are interested in that particular item or goods which this other person has promised to buy from you. So if you say that promises will not be enforced, it's going to prevent people getting into transactions, especially in today's current day markets and business transactions. Because in this day and age, many of them are based on promises, على أساس الوعود, which could take time. That's why, like the question you were asking as well, we should just make it all as a promise. Not a sale, it's a promise. It's easy. That whenever something is for the future, it's just a promise. And when it's for the future, when it's a promise, then it becomes binding. They will take you to court as well. You have to, if you, for example, say, I don't want it, they'll make you pay that money and you take that item. When we say Islamically, it's enforced in a court of law, then either two things. They say that you will be forced to go ahead. So if you say, I don't want it anymore, they will force you to pay that money. Whether you want the item or not, you have to pay that money. Take the item if you want. Or sometimes you just compensate for the costs of the other party. That's also fine. Look, they had to put in this much effort and this cost they had, accrued or whatever.
Did you know how you said it wouldn't be within the court of law when you refer to promise? Does that mean only if it's not written promises?
No.
Yeah.
Nothing to do with written. It's just that the general ruling with promises, whether written or non-written, is that it's binding religiously, not binding legally. That's the basic ruling. The classical fuqaha say this as well. However, in certain cases where the loss and the harm is severe, especially financial harm, then in those cases they will be enforced in a court of law as
To
well.
protect yourself, you'd rather have that promise written in the first.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's yeah. But even if it's verbal, if you can't go to the court, somebody recorded it, whatever. And this is taken mainly from the Maliki madhab. In the Maliki madhab, there's a lot of emphasis on. There's a discussion on promises being enforced in a court of law. This is what the Maliki madhab says, that if there's a promise, and because of the promise, the one who was promisee, entered into something because of that promise, and put in effort and money, etc., then it will be enforced in a court of law. Okay. So, and then the example they give is that someone says to, like I said, someone says to another, demolish your house and I'll give you a loan. He demolished it. Whole house. Where's my loan? No loan. No. Where's he gonna live? That's like a major promise. He's demolished his whole house. I'll give you a loan to buy a new house. He demolished it based on that promise. So he entered something and he did something because of the promise. This type of promise will be enforced through a court of law. فهدم الموعود له داره اعتمادا على وعده فيلزم الواعد قضاء أن يقرضه المبلغ الموعود. Therefore the promiser will be forced qada'an that he must give that loan to. It's not just saying he will have to give that loan as promised. Likewise, the other example, then marry this woman and I'll give you a loan, and then he married her, and the other person said, I'm not giving you a loan, so he will be also forced. So this is qada'an and diyanatan. Diyanatan, religiously, all promises. I'll come to your house tomorrow, I'll call you at 5 o'clock, I'll see you at 6 o'clock. All, religiously, they're all, I mean, they're still major sins to go against. You tell someone, I'll call you at 6. People take these lightly. And you don't call them at 6. Haram. Unless there's a valid excuse. You got tied up or you forgot completely or something.
So forgot is a valid excuse.
Yeah, it's a valid, you completely forgot to. You try your best to remember, but you just completely skipped your mind. It's a valid excuse. Like, the hadith says that forgetfulness, mistake, and what you were forced. What's the hadith? You must رفع عن أمتي الخطأ والنسيان. So خطأ, mistake, and nisyan, forgetfulness. وما استكرهوا عليه. When you're forced to do something, these three things have been uplifted. The accountability for these three things have been uplifted for my ummah. So forgetfulness as well, but that's why I'm saying that diyanatan is really important to take promises seriously. That's a major sin. When we say that it's not qada'an, it doesn't make the matter light. Qada'an, in the court of law, that's secondary. Really, in other words, the first is the court of Allah. Court of Allah and a court of law meaning the human beings' courts. So in the court of Allah, all promises are binding. The discussion is whether, even in a court of law of the country, so here, only those promises which basically result in major harm. Okay? Now, there remains last thing here, that how do you identify which type of promises? We said sometimes. We just said those type of promises which result in the promisee being faced with major harm and costs, etc., suffering. So, how do you differentiate which kind of promise you can take to the court of law and which one you can't? بين الوعد الذي يلزم قضاء وبين الوعد الذي لا يلزم. So according to Mufti Taqi, he says, look, we can base this on two things. Number one is that any government, Muslim or non-Muslim, they can identify and fix which type of promises will be enforced in a court of law. You can make a qanun. So therefore, the law will determine which kind of promises are enforced in a court of law. And nowadays, in business, they all go in a court of law. If one company or one businessman promises another, and you can take them. The basic laws of the countries is that you have to, you're all binding if you make a promise. Even if you're like you were saying, buying online or something, it's a promise, and you have to. You say after 3 days, but after that 3 days, you just say, no, I don't want it anymore. They'll take you to a court. So that's one way. And the second way to identify what type of promise is enforced is whenever أن يكون في الوفاء بالوعد كلفة على الموعد له. Yeah. Whenever there's been some financial what? You can say loss, but he had to spend, there's some financial something for the person who was promised. Financial cost. Or you can just say that, look, in their contract, they just agree on this. That I promise, and if not, then we can take this to a court. You understand this point? That it's mentioned in there at the time of promise that this promise is basically, they mention at the time of promise that this is legally binding. That's what happens normally. Either the government identifies what type of promise is, or it could be in a way that the two transacting parties, they just agree in the promise that this will be legally binding. If either one of us turn away, the other party has a right to go and get it enforced in a law, in a court of law. So it's easy. And that's what the Islamic Fiqh Academy also said. And if you have an excuse, then the court will decide whether your excuse is valid or not. Now, there's a last point with regards to these promises. This getting enforced, or saying that the promise will be enforced in a court of law, this is a massive issue. Doesn't that resemble a sale? Is it just like a sale? In other words, what's the difference between promising and sale? That's why, in Islamic banking, this is, if you read this is also in English, this part. If you read Mr. Usman's Introduction to Islamic Finance, he's got a whole 7-8 pages on promise. So you've got in English. If you can get that and just read that as well, it's really, because what happens in these Islamic alternatives to the mortgage is basically it's based on promise. If you do murabaha is basically you identify the house, the bank buys the house, and you promise that you will buy the house from the bank. Imagine the bank buys the house and you say, I don't want it anymore. The bank only bought the house. Well, what's the bank going to do with the house? They don't need the house. So they buy it, they put the markup profit, and then they sell it to you. They've bought it for 180,000. They put their they sell it to you for 240,000, and then you pay slowly 240,000. That product is no longer available in most banks, especially in England. But in the beginning, that's what HSBC used to do. Murabaha. There's murabaha, there's ijara. But even in ijara, there's promise. You have some money and they have some money. You have a master agreement, which is all promises that this will take place first, then this will take place, then this will take place. You will promise that every month you're going to pay some amount and buy. You're actually every month buying a share of the bank. Diminishing musharaka. That's what happens in diminishing musharaka. Diminishing musharaka is that it's a joint ownership which is diminishing. So diminishing meaning at the end it's going to be sole ownership. Musharaka is partnership which is diminishing. Diminishing is getting less and less and less, and then that partnership will no longer remain. So you might have 20% of the house. The bank has 80% of the house in the beginning. Every month you're paying rent for the bank's 80%, and a small portion towards buying the 20%. So as you pay more, your share gets more and the rent becomes less. So it's diminishing. What's diminishing? The partnership is diminishing. So in there as well, there's all promises. I'm going to look at those Islamic banking ones again, but they're all based on promise. There's a promise first to jointly purchase. Then there's a promise from the customer that I will buy every month a part of your share. And there's a promise of renting. So there's lots of promises. And this is one of the greatest issues that has been debated and people have raised. Those people who are opposed to Islamic banking, this is the biggest issue they bring. Isn't this like transaction in transactions? صفقة في صفقتين. Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam naha an bay'atain fi bay'. Like one transaction into two. So this is haram. You can't have two transactions in one transaction. You can't have this transaction that, look, I will sell you my car on the condition that you sell me your donkey. There's two transactions. You can't have one.
You can swap it though.
Yeah, that's one transaction.
You can't say pay for my car.
Yeah, it's two different sales.
Conditional transaction.
Yeah, conditional transaction. Two different things. I sell you my car on the condition that you give me a loan, or on the condition that you do something else. Like, two different things.
It's different to like part exchange. With your car, part exchange.
That's part of the same sale.
Same thing.
So, just 1 second. So this is not allowed. Transactions. So they say here that there's about 3-4 transactions all tied up with one another. One agreement I have with you that I'm going to buy your car. There's another agreement I have with you that I'm going to buy a phone. There's a third agreement that you're going to buy my dog. There's a fourth agreement that I'm going to rent you a house. The fifth agreement is that I'm going to paint your house for like you're going to give me payment for it. So there's 5 different things, and we're tying all of these things together. This one will happen based on this one. If this happens, then this happens. If this doesn't happen, this one doesn't happen. One is tied up with the other. So this is what you call contingent. This is not allowed. So this is why Fiqh Usmani had to, and many others in Islamic banking had to explain this. That look, this is a promise. It's not. In what happens in Islamic banking is not one transaction which is tied up with another transaction. Rather, it's a side promise, which will be enforced in a court of law. This is why he's written. You should read that in 7-8 pages, because other people don't get it. They say it's the same thing. It's what? It's like you're doing one transaction. One transaction is what? I am buying the house from the bank, and then the next transaction is the bank is going to rent it to you. You're agreeing on a rent. So they say this is one transaction which is mu'allaq, which is connected to, contingent upon, tied up with another transaction, which is not allowed in the hadith. The proponents of Islamic banking, they say no, these are different transactions. One is a promise to the other, and promise is allowed. So basically, if I sell you my phone, we agree on this phone, and I also promise that inshallah I'll give you a dawat. Or I promise you this phone, I sell you, on the promise that next year you sell me your car. We're not agreeing on any price or anything. Just, I have so many people want to buy this phone for me. It's £100. But you saying, okay, look, sell it to me, well, I'll give you a promise. Next year, I'm going to sell my car. You like my car quite a bit, you tell me. So in about 3-4 months' time, I'm going to sell the car. I promise you that I'll sell you the car. So that's a promise which is allowed. Promise which is attached to a sale is allowed. But if we say that, look, I'm going to sell you this phone for £100, and we make another transaction which is I buy your car for £5,000, and we tie them up.
So you say, I'll buy this phone. If you buy this phone off me for £100, then when you sell your car in 3 months, I'll buy it off you for £5,000.
Meaning it's done, it's connected. One, just because it gets confusing. So tying up one transaction in a way that if one takes place, the other one takes place. If one doesn't take place, the other one doesn't take place. That's what you call tied up with one transaction to the other. But if we say it's a promise, then promise, the difference is that it's not conditional upon the other. One transaction is not conditional upon the other. So what that means, it's a promise. It will still happen, but it's not conditional. If I say I sell you this phone, which is conditional that you sell me your car. If you don't sell me the car, then this phone won't be sold. If I don't sell you this phone, automatically the sale of the car will not take place. But if I say I'll sell you this phone and you promise me then whether you go against that promise or you don't go against that promise, whether it takes 10 years for you to go to the courts of law, whether you have paperwork or no, maybe you might even what you might in the court you might not get it, like you know, and you might fail. This phone will always be sold. You understand? Because the other one, I might not you want to go in the court. So this I'm saying that I sell you this phone, and you promise to sell me the car. Now you said no, I don't want to sell the car anymore. You've gone against your promise. You're sinful, be honest. Then we say, can you take it in a court of law? Is it part of those things that you can take in a court of law, etc.? This will always be sold. This will always take place, enacted. It's not based on that car being sold to me. Do you understand? It's not based on the car being sold to me. This is done and dusted. Yes, I will say, but what about your car then? You know, you say, no, I don't want to. I'm going to take you to court or try taking a court. I don't know, might go through, might not. I might say, forget it, I don't want to go to court. This one will always happen. So, just to summarize this, there's the Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam forbade one transaction being contingent upon the another transaction. That you do a transaction which is contingent upon another transaction. It's tied up with it. Known as bay'ataini fi bay'ah. One transaction in two transactions. Again, there's a whole section on this. I'm just mentioning it here because it's come to the promise. So I was saying that in Islamic banking, a lot of people argue against it. They think, or they say, that's their view, that the various transactions in Islamic banking are different transactions, they're being tied up with one another. Those who argue in favor for Islamic banking, they say that they're not transactions, rather they are promises. There's one transaction, and the second one is a promise. And a promise, then, can it be enforced in a court of law, etc.? So then, yes. So, for example, the bank can take the customer to the look. He promised he's going to buy this house from me. We went and bought the house. So now force him. He has to buy this house from us. Or give us our costs of what we had to endure, basically. You were saying?
Just based on conditional transactions. So you couldn't have one agreement which basically stated, for instance, you're buying the house and you're going to rent the house. So
Same
there's
house?
two things. So there's two things in that one transaction. So you're buying the house and you also agreed to rent the house. There's
Yeah.
one transaction.
Yeah, you can
There's
put
two
in one.
elements,
Yeah,
there's two elements to it. So you couldn't do that.
you could put in one document, but they're two different transactions, and they can't be conditional on one on the other. One is a rental, so you're buying the house from me, and then you're going to rent it from me. No, you're buying the house from me, then it's gone to you. So which way are you? What do you mean by that?
No, whichever, just any two things you couldn't bind them into one.
You can't bind them into one contract. No. It has to be separate. You can't make one transaction contingent upon another.
Could you not argue that it's similar in regards to your these guys are put like it's in the mortgage, Islamic mortgage side, the diminishing, it's your they're putting up the bigger half and because they're putting, let's say if it's 50-50%, let's say, but you're benefiting from that house, you're obviously gonna have to pay them the rent for that side. It's sort of to one. There's a second argument.
You just saying
Where
it's
they say-
unfair. You're
where
saying
they
it's
say-
unfair.
No, as in you're benefiting from that product. You've both gone in 50-50.
Okay, the house belongs half
Yeah.
to the bank and half to you.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're benefiting from that house.
Yeah.
So you're paying rent for that
Yeah,
half,
that's fine.
and then you're paying them
Yeah.
their loan back.
So that's fine. I don't understand what you're doing.
No, but I thought that's what you were saying, that people were saying that there's a transaction within a transaction.
How could you make rent if they don't buy it? If they're not part of that? Sure, if you're going to pay them rent. First, they
No,
have
how to do it.
I said there are certain people who do
Yeah.
not agree with Islamic bank
Stating
models.
that it's yes,
models. The whole thing is wrong.
Oh, okay.
No one's buying the house. No one's renting. It's all haram. That's what they say. So
And it
basically,
was on
the
the
whole
basis that it's a
contract, the
transaction
whole
within a
contract. There are people, there are people who argue against Islamic banking.
Mhm.
So when they see a product, that this is a product in which there's a buying joint ownership of the house. There's another element in it which is the customer renting. There's another element in it, he's paying every month a small amount to purchase the bank's property, etc. etc. They say these are all transactions tied up with one another. That's why Islamic banking is completely haram. Nobody can go to an Islamic bank and do anything. That's what they say. Whereas Mufti Osmani and many others who allow Islamic banking, they try to explain it. Look, this is the whole contract. It's not one transaction tied up on another transaction. This is one transaction, another is a promise. And then there's a whole detailed discussion on the promise. This is what I'm just trying to say, that this is how there's two views on it. That's why, this book, Introduction to Islamic Finance, can you just get it from
Page 83. Go ahead. Do you want?
Yeah, it's online as well, this book. There's so many other things to discuss. I think we're going to do 8 years of this. It's in English, down on the left, where the English books are. Because that was a different discussion. The whole Islamic banking, products I was going to explain to them. Again, they come. Separate discussion. You see, the thing is, because a lot of things are tied up. Now, that's why we need to leave it to just that part that we're discussing, because
We'll get to that.
everything it's all tied up. Our whole fiqh transactions, everything's tied up with the other. And the whole Islamic banking section, that's like another 3 lessons I wanted to do, at least 2 lessons. Go through each product, how it works, the whole discussion. But because from there one element came, we want to understand that whole. So it's so much this connection basically. But anyway, because here there's just wa'ad and then what is it? Promises.
Sure, 83.
120 and it's 120, yeah. And you were saying what, 83?
In my copy, it's 83.
Okay. So it says here, look, another important issue in murabaha financing, which has been subject of debate between contemporary Sharia scholars, is that the bank. This is just murabaha. You ask the client to sign a promise to purchase the commodity when it is acquired by the finance. And you know what they do in Islamic banking? This is what I was going to discuss right now. I was just coming to that. They make it only one-sided promise, unilateral promise, because bilateral, both sides promise, that's not allowed as well, because it's very tushbihu say, it's very resembles, both one saying I will buy, the other one saying I will sell. It's more or less you're buying and selling. So that's why. Let's get back to the original discussion, then I'll just do the whole thing. What was I saying originally?
Why is the difference between promise and sin?
Yeah, that was the original issue. That the question that arises is that what is the difference between a sale and a promise? Because we said that a promise in certain cases is enforced by a court of law. So if someone promises to buy something, if I promised you I'll buy your car next year for £5,000, and the ruling is that you go in a court of law. So what's the difference between a sale, which will also take place, and a promise? So it's become very similar to the bay. Or it's like a bay. You're attributing a bay to a future, which is not allowed. Attributing. Remember in the beginning I said to attribute a sale to the future is not allowed. So this becomes like similar to attributing a sale to the future. And then he said here that in 2 ways there's a difference between a promise which is enforced and a sale. There's a difference between the 2. Number 1, when someone there's a sale which is attributed to the future, then that sale does not require when that future date comes for a new ijab qabul, for a, no, not a new, it doesn't require, yeah, another time ijab qabul. That's the difference. Whereas, do you understand what I'm saying? A promise to buy or sell is not a sale. We'll translate it for you. Because a sale requires, in order to be complete at that time, at that promised time given, for another for offer and acceptance from both sides, or that the non-verbal exchange that's required. If ijab qabul does not take place, and neither non-verbal exchange, then it will not be considered to be a sale. Contrary to a sale which is attributed to the future, because that does not require another ijab and qabul, rather it will automatically occur at that fixed date. That's one difference. Do you understand? Promise means what? That if you promise on the 10th of July that you will both enter into a transaction, and when 10th of July comes, ijab, qabul have to take place. There has to be a proper sale taking place on that day. That's what promise means. And if someone, that's promise. And a sale, which is attributed to the future, you're doing ijab, qabul now, for it to come into uh, existence on 10th of July. So automatically on 10th of July, the item of sale will transfer into the ownership of the mushtari, the buyer, and automatically the price will go to that person. Or it will be necessary for him to. So that's the difference between the two. From the two, the second one is what's not allowed. Bay' fil mustaqbil is not allowed. Remember, I mentioned this just a while ago. Future sale or a sale attribute to the future is not allowed. And what's allowed? Promising one another to do a sale in the future, that's allowed. And there's a difference between the two. A lot of these things you have to remember also the why. There's two major things in the whole business. Kitab al-Buyu sale. One is tarabi. I mentioned this before. Both sides have to be happy. Number two, all of these rules are based on some things in order to avoid dispute, potential dispute. All the rules are built on that potential dispute. So, anyway, did you understand this point what I just said?
Mm.
We talked about promise, and I mentioned promise is something that could be enforced in a court of law. Question is then, what's the difference between this promise you're making? Because it's going to happen anyway. So what's the difference between this promise?
You're not obligated at that stage.
Yeah. What's the difference between this promise and a sale that you're doing in the future? Because we're saying a promise is allowed. You can promise one another to do a sale on 10th of July, but you can't buy and sell now for it to take place on 10th of July. So
you can't do a sale now for the future.
You can't do that. You can't do a sale now. Look, there's slight differences. You can't do a sale now for the future. This is you're doing a sale. If you do sale now, which means
Yeah, you can say now. Yeah, say now, and I'll take the goods in the future. That you can do.
look, it gets a bit confusing because these are.
The terms are not.
Look, for example, me and him. Okay, we'll do different scenarios right now. Okay, I sell you my phone. I sell my phone to you. One is me and him. I sell my phone to you. He says I accept the phone. It's done right now. Okay, that's a sale right now. If we say I sell this phone to you, I'll become yours on 10th of July. And you say okay, I buy this phone, and it will become mine on the 10th of July. That's a sale. Ijab qabul done, but it's attributed to the future for the mustaqbil. That's haram. Third one is, I promise you I'll sell you this phone on 10th of July. and you say, okay, I promise I'll buy it to you from you on the 10th of July, £10. Nothing's happened. Now, 10th of July comes, we have to do it. In the second scenario, no new ijab was required, no new qabul was required, no signatures required, nothing. Automatically, as soon as the sun rises on 10th of July, the phone's become, I'm sleeping and in my sleep it's gone to him. And in my sleep, that sale is taking place. Whereas the promise, I have to come back. Okay, you made a promise. Now go ahead. So then you have to do a new ijab and qabul on that day.
In future sale, does like any transaction take place? For example, on 10th, the phone will be is one about point in time.
So, fine.
When you make the like future sale, today I'm making the future sale. You're selling the phone on 10th of July. Or am I paying anything to you on the day or just the?
You see, this is why the confusion comes in. Who's paying when? That's not the main part here. Let's keep the paying and the items and giving. That's separate. There's a different discussion. Sale doesn't happen by giving something or not giving something.
That's when the contract's binding. It's when you
Sale, when you can do a sale now, and I don't give you the phone now. I give you the phone for £10. Yes, but I keep it with me. I'll give it to you after 2 years.
it's the transfer of ownership, basically, isn't it?
Yeah, the transfer of ownership. It's not about who's giving money. People buy things. You buy a sofa and you pay after 10 years, paying slowly, slowly, slowly. People buy cars and pay after 5 years, slowly, slowly. But they say that doesn't mean. Imagine you buy a car and you're paying slowly, or they say, okay, you stop paying after 2 years, and you're using it for 2 years. That doesn't mean that car wasn't yours for 2 years. So anyway, let's leave the who's paying. The main part here, because this is why, because we're looking at who's giving the money and when you're giving the money, etc. No, there's three. One is a sale right now. I sell you this phone, and you pay me the money. Sorry, you accept the phone. I sell you the phone. I have sold this phone to you. You say I've accepted. From today, this phone has become yours, whether I'm giving it to you or not. Right now, from today, £100 is binding on you and me. When I calculate my zakat, I'm going to start calculating those £100. For example, that's another. He's actually given that example as well. But when I calculate, what's today?
cheap 70%.
Can we sell fireworks or not? That's another. I was going to look at all of that today. You know what? Because Mabi, there's a massive discussion on Mabi. What can you actually sell? Anyway, so the money is binding on him. If a sale is today, now after 1 week, I'm paying my zakat. I'm looking at all the money that people owe me. And I will also imagine I'm giving him the phone and he owes me money. So I will look in my calculation that he owes me £100. So I have to include that in my zakat calculation. Like we read last year, you can include it. If not, then you backdate it. But if it was a promise, then I don't have to include that in my zakat because it's not due on him. That's just a promise. And the third one, so these two are allowed. The sale right now is allowed, and promise for the future is allowed, which are two clear things. The middle one is a bit dodgy, that's why it's not allowed. The sale right now, phones become yours. The phone become yours, meaning it's, whether I give it to you in your hands right now or not, but it's become yours. Imagine we've done the sale right now and my phone's in my car. Okay, after the lesson finishes, I'll give you the phone. But it's yours now. Until half an hour, until I haven't given it to you. Still in my qabd. Okay, so there's rules that if something happens to it, then still be because I haven't given you the risk of it. But it's become yours. So this is when, if you do a sale right now, £100, I'm selling this phone to you, and imagine I give you the phone. Okay, here, take the phone. Okay, I sell you the phone. It's just a mock. I sell you the phone, and say I buy the phone for £100. He bought it for £100. Okay. He hasn't given me the money. Imagine, but it's done. If I calculate my zakat, I have to think that he owes me £100. There's a debt of him on me. Okay. Uh, I promise you, 10th of July, I'll sell this phone to you for 100. I even say £100. You say, okay, I promise. Until 10th of July, the phone is still mine. And until 10th of July, there's not even a penny he has to give me. On 10th of July, we have to do a new ijab. So when 10th of July comes, then I have to say, okay, based on the promise, here, I sell you the phone. He has to accept it. I buy the phone. The new ijab and qabul has to take place on that 10th of July. And if one of us, for example, he says, no, I'm not going to go ahead, then I say, okay, you don't want to go ahead, Allah's going to punish you, you're going to be sinful, but you know what, I'm not going to pursue in a court of law. Okay. All right, Qiyamah mein dekh lenge. Tejo lahu. You know, they say. So we'll see on Qiyamah that you promised me and you gave me harm. You know, somebody else, I kept this phone, so many other people would have bought it from me. But because you promised me that on 10th of July you're going to buy it, I sold it to nobody, and now nobody's going to give me £100. I'm going to see you in Qiyamah Day. But I'm not going to do anything in the court. Plus, I don't have any, evidence to take him to the court. So that's it. The sale, the phone will remain with me. That's a promise. And if I go to the courts, I'm going to take you to court. So then I start legal proceedings, and it might take 4 months. I might win that case. I might not win the case. If I do win the case, then I will force him to take the phone and give me the £100. Maybe it might be £80. The court might say. The court might say, if the value has gone down to £60, Islamically you have to pay me £100. The court might decide £60, whatever. So that's a promise. And the middle one, which is not allowed, is where you're doing a done deal for the future. So we say, forget giving the phone, but we do a ijab and qabul. I sell you my phone to be effective on the 10th of July. You say, I bought your phone,
On the 10th of July.
which is to be enacted on the 10th of July. Not I will buy it on the 10th of July. That's a promise. I've bought it for the 10th of July. Effective on the 10th of July. So now, on 10th of July, I don't have to. New ijab qabul is not necessary. That's what you call a bay' for the future. That's not allowed. A promise is allowed because it's a new ijab and qabul. A promise is like an engagement, like marriage, for example. I promise I'll give you my daughter. He says, I promise I'll give you my son. Okay, engagement. Next year, 10th of July, nikah will be done. Nikah done right now, but to be started on the 10th of July. ईजाब कबूल कबूल क्या आपने उसको निकाह में मैंने कबूल किया 10 जुलाई से I've accepted her in my marriage to be from the 10th of July. So can that man and woman have sexual intercourse? Understand? Because they're saying whether it's married or not married, so it's like because this for the future it's a bit problematic. Promising in the future is different to doing the same to be enacted to come into existence automatically. Promising to buy and sell something on a future date is different to not agree to having the sale done, which is to automatically come into existence on a future date. People online are thinking that's what was rubbish. It's crazy. I've never voiced this. Nobody 5th of November. It's not. I think Sikh people have got something to it. In Leicester, where we live, we have Hindus, Sikhs. Everyone's got. There's a celebration every other week. But anyway, I think it's quite long because I'm sure it's clear now. Because last thing you were saying.
I was going to say, it goes back to what you said, that these things are put into place to avoid potential dispute. If the sale was automatic, the condition, that phone was yours up until that date, you'd be less careful with it potentially.
It's going to, because it's blurry, potential dispute. That's the reason why it's not allowed.
Now that promise though, he's allowed to say no if he has a genuine reason though,
that
he's
is
not
true.
sinful for it. So if he has a genuine reason that look, this was based on the condition that it was good, but now it's
Exactly. That's a good because the promise doesn't mean it's always going to go through. That's another difference as well. It's not always going to go through. If you have a genuine excuse to not go ahead with it, then you won't go ahead with it. So there's a difference between promise and future sale. But so anyway, that was the original thing that we were talking about. That what's the difference between a promise which is enforced in a court of law, which is enforced as well. You might say sometimes it's not enforced, but even if it's enforced, there's still a difference between a promise which is enforced in a court of law, like you are forced to go ahead and buy it, or a future sale which automatically takes place on that date. There's differences. So that's the one main point.
The
Now, just 1 second. Sorry. Yeah, this what we just said right now. This is what Mufti Usman is saying, that the second difference is this: that in a sale, no excuse, never. It's always done. A sale for the future, it's always done. Whereas promise is if you have other, then in certain situations it might not be done. So that's another difference. Okay. Look, I'll read this whole paragraph. أن البيع لا ينعقد بمجرد الوعد وإنما يحتاج الطرفان إلى عقده في التاريخ الموعود. A bay does not take place with the mere promise. Rather, both parties at the promised date will have to do a new transaction. It's clear? فإن أخلف الواعد في وعده, if the promiser went against his promise, ولم يعقد البيع في أوانه, and when the time came he did not go ahead with the sale, فإن القاضي يجبره, the qadi, the judge in the court, will force him إذا كان قادرا على تنفيذ البيع, if this person was able to carry out with the transaction. And إن كان إخلافه للوعد لسبب خارج وإن كان إخلافه للوعد لسبب خارج عن اختياره, if his going against the promise was due to a reason which was beyond his control, وكان له عذر واضح في ذلك, and he had a clear عذر for it, فإنه يعذر, then his عذر will be accepted, his excuse will be accepted. أما في البيع المضاف إلى المستقبل, as far as a transaction sale which is attributed to the future, فالبيع بات منذ يوم البيع, the sale is 100% conclusive from day one. Okay. فلا يعذر الطرف المقصر في حال من الأحوال. Any party who doesn't want to go ahead with it in any situation will never be excused. Never. You can never have any excuse for it. It's going to happen whether someone's granddad dies or father dies or they're half dead. Even if they die, they will carry on from the inheritance or whatever. That sale has to take place.
But that's haram.
Yes,
That's the future one.
future. He's explaining the difference between a promise and, because the question was, what is the one is halal, one is haram. So what's the difference? Because a lot of people think, or it seems when you don't look at it properly, apparently they both seem the same. Promising to buy and sell 10th of July, or a sale to come into existence of 10th of July. So he's explaining two major differences between these two things. One is allowed, one is not allowed. One was the first one, which I explained, point number one, which was automatically, and the second is this. And then also things like zakat and all these things will be affected. So he says here, فإن كان الشراء شيئا في التاريخ المستقبل, if someone buys for the future sale, a sale for the future, then the buyer becomes indebted to give that money on that date as soon as morning comes automatically. If you say this phone, £100 on the 10th of July, Fajr al-Sadiq takes place on the 10th of July, automatically money becomes necessary upon you. Whereas in the second case, nothing's become necessary upon you yet. You could pray Fajr, nothing. You die, nothing taken from your inheritance. Because nothing's happened yet. Imagine, Fajr takes place, after Fajr, the buyer dies. In the sale, From the inheritance, when you have to give people money, £100 will have to be taken and given to me. That's a loan. On that day, when they are looking at the inheritance, because as soon as Fajr happened, it's become automatically that money is mine, £100. Which is not allowed. The future sale. This is what future sale means. The difference we're trying to show. Uh, Whereas in the promise, it won't happen automatically. Rather, they will have to contract the sale again. And if one doesn't agree, then you go to the court. It might take 3 weeks, 4 weeks, etc. Then when it occurs, that's when the price will be. So this is the difference. Anyway, so to summarize this, and then we want to finish with this whole promise thing, because this led me to this discussion, was that in Islamic banking, which we'll talk about again later, was that there's promises that take place. Like here he says, promise to purchase. Just read this if you can. The promise to purchase. A number of Muslim jurists are of the view that fulfilling a promise is mandatory and a moral as well as legal obligation. And then he's mentioned all of it here. It's like 5 pages. Ayatul Munafiq Thalatun, and all the ayat. So it's about 5-6 pages if you can remember, read this. So why did we mention Islamic banking? Is because down there what happens is that there's promises to go ahead with the certain types of sales. You're just promising. That's what's happening in Islamic banking. What's happening? Promises to go ahead with certain contracts, certain transactions. It's not one it's not one being contingent of the other. That was another thing we discussed. So that's why the whole discussion is on promises, that because contingent over the other is not allowed. We said about future sales, that's not allowed. That's one thing that's not allowed. Another thing which is not allowed is what? 2 transactions in one. That's another ruling of Sharia. Okay, that's not allowed. So these Islamic banking products, you have different transactions taking place. So those people who argue against it, they say they're not allowed because each one is contingent on the other. Whereas those who argue in favor of it, they say no, it's a promise. It's not contingent. And then the promise rule is like what we just discussed. Final part here is that the Islamic Fiqh Academy in Jeddah, they've said that this can only be a unilateral promise. Just to sort of, even bilateral promise is really still a promise. But because sometimes it could be used as a hila, and it resembles a sale. A future sale to happen on 10th of July, and promising on 10th of July, they say that it's only permissible to do one-sided promise in Islamic banking, unilateral promise. So this is the rule that they follow in all these Islamic banking, the IOP and all of them, that it's only from one side, unilateral promise. Who makes the promise in this case? No, the buyer. It's really the buyer. So the bank says, I'm buying this house. Okay, and the promise, the customer, the client, the guy who wants a mortgage, he says, I promise, he signs on a contract, I promise to buy this house off you. That's it. The bank will not say, I promise to sell the house. They won't do that, but they will sell it because they want to sell it. So it's not really in their interest, in their main interest. The main here thing required is the customer. So this is the rule that the modern day scholars are following, that this promise is only allowed when it's unilateral, not both I promise to buy and I promise to sell, because then even though technically that's still a promise allowed, but because like a lot of you guys couldn't even understand the difference between the two, it resembles the sale. So to kind of make it clear and not have a hila, they say only one-sided promise. If it's muwa'ada min al-tarafayn, if there's a muwa'ada, then the Islamic Fiqh Academy in Jeddah, they don't allow it. لكونها مشابهة للعقد المضاف إلى المستقبل, because it resembles a future sale. Because both of them, each of the two parties, have taken it upon themselves, committed to a sale in the future. Contrary to promise from one side, a unilateral promise, because the only person that's committed is one person, and the other person has not committed. He's not made a promise. So therefore, they say it's a clear distinction, even though there's still distinction, even if it's two-sided. Mufti Usmani finally says here that sometimes you need promises on both sides. So therefore, technically, that will also be allowed, even though Islamic Academy have said this. He says, ربما تمس الحاجة إلى مواعدة ملزمة للطرفين. Sometimes you need both of them to promise and make them both enforce in a court of law. خاصة في التجارة الدولية واتفاقيات التوريد, especially in international trade and اتفاقيات التوريد. You know what اتفاقيات التوريد means? There's a special someone made like all the terms used in Fiqh Buyu. There was a table with all the English translations for it.
Yeah, I remember seeing
It's in the
like a glossary.
Yeah, it's in the WhatsApp group.
Yeah.
See if you can find it. This is just last 2 minutes. Do you understand this last point? What I'm saying? We said that the Islamic Academy they have resolved that in Islamic banking, all these products, only one party makes a promise. Generally, they don't allow it. So Dr. Usmani is saying after that because it is required sometimes, in certain exceptional cases, because technically it's allowed, it's still different from a sale, which is not allowed according to anyone, future sale. Therefore, in certain, maybe only one thing, which I wanted to talk about it today, but I won't. They said that even if it's promises from both sides, then it is permissible. You can say even like in international trade, uh, like for example, customer gives you an order of £50,000 worth of goods. Okay, both parties are promising. Parties are promising that in the future, after 3 weeks, I will buy this off you and I will sell you. Will both of them be harmed if the other party goes against the promise, or only one party will be harmed? Only one party. If if the seller goes against the promises, okay, I don't want to sell it to you.
Depends what it is, but I think both.
Yeah, it depends.
Both, because the customer might have then promised someone else something. That's why he says that in this current day where there's international trade, it's okay to have promises from both sides. And then there's specifically اتفاقيات التوريد, which means gives an example, like a hotel, they need every day, they need some medicines or some food to come. So the owner of the hotel goes into a contract with a businessman or with the company that for this day these, like for example, we want food on this day, etc. Or we need medicines, or we need things. So this is a promise. Every day for the next week, bring food. Or next week on this day, you order for food.
How about when we book like advance ticket? For example, 2 months time, we got a ticket for like
Have you paid for it? And
paid for it on the day.
yeah, that's done.
That's fine.
That's
But
done.
if I pay future, then it will be problematic.
Like for example, ticket for what?
For example, airline ticket.
Okay, airline
Trip
ticket.
to
Yeah.
next year.
Yeah.
Probably in future after they 50% payment. And then the
If they say to you that you don't have to pay unless you have to pay later,
yeah, that's right.
if they say okay, this payment is not required, and you have to pay a day before you fly, that's when the payment is required. You've agreed on that.
Yeah.
Okay. What about if you don't pay and you don't go?
Incur a loss. No.
Sorry?
It will incur a loss.
No, imagine you don't pay. What's gonna happen? You just go away and you just run away somewhere.
They lose the ticket.
Who will lose the ticket?
No. Nothing will happen. No.
You don't go, you don't want to fly, and you don't want to pay. You booked a ticket for the 10th of July, and on the 8th of July, you just went to Afghanistan and hid in the mountain.
They'll still take the money.
Imagine if they can't take the money. How will they take the money? If you've not given them no details.
I won't happen.
No, but how will they take your money? They'll come to your house to take the money?
No, you have to enter in some form of detail.
That's the thing, yeah. So card details you've given, that's the thing. It's different. You've given them a way to take the money. That means you've given the money. You see, promise is where you have to agree and then you have to give them money. They can't have easy access to your money.
But my account has not deducted on this particular time.
That's fine. That's just you've given them access. You've given them the box. It's there. Take the money whenever you want. They just don't want to take it.
Then that means it's a future sale. Isn't it?
Technically,
No, it's not future sale.
No, because you've given them the details.
Yeah.
So you've done the.
You've given them the money. The sale is right now. You've given them the money.
Transaction is done.
Transaction is
The money
done.
can be taken
Well,
whenever.
your transaction is done.
The transaction is
On
done.
that day, not
Yeah, transaction is done. I've bought the ticket, but I'm gonna
in the future.
fly in the future. And you've given them the money, or you've given them access to the money.
It's up to them to take it.
Take it or not. They can take it tomorrow. They can take it a day before. But when you don't give access anything, this is a promise. This is just you're promising, and even the agreement, how you do the agreement, you promise in the words, the agreement, understanding that will also play a role as well. But this is just a promise. Like for example, as an airline company, who wants to reserve, like or something that look, in the future this program or this, like an event will take place. But if you want to just put in your details here that you're interested or you're going to go, not just interested, you will go ahead with this. It's a promise. So that's different. There may be some situations like that where you just kind of promising, like for example what? Like clear promise.
Events. If you're interested in going to this event, you just give your name.
You give your name and you
book the place for
And you book your place.
you book your place and pay on the day.
Say when you go into the.
And if you don't go then?
And you don't pay like here, this class. Put a name down, online confirmation, class live class confirmation, and then when we come, they payment.
Imagine if you go to this like an event and you've registered and you've booked your seat, but you've given no payment, nothing, they have no access, no card, no credit cards, nothing. And if on that day you do not end up going, what normally happens?
That's it. You don't pay. There's no reason.
They
The
can't.
transaction hasn't taken place because both sides of the transaction hasn't taken place.
Rarely
You
this
haven't paid them.
takes place in
Yeah. They wouldn't
Yeah.
book or save your seat.
They'll probably just email you to say, well, I didn't reach a time.
Most cases, not taking
No, it's like here. Like this is how.
You know,
it
but
works.
they will not reserve your seat like that.
Because then they run the risk that you won't turn up.
That's it. So what will they do then?
They take money.
You can take money, the card details
Take a call.
to ensure that
So
they're.
basically they'll do the sale. The sale will happen. They'll take card details, which is access to money or the money. So that's the difference between promise and promise.
So if, like, the iPhone 12, whatever, only released on 1st of December.
So you say again, yeah?
If the new iPhone is only released 1st of December, say,
Don't worry about that. You promised me to buy it.
they say pre-order it now, and you pre-order it, and you give your card details. But on the 1st of December, there's no new, they don't ask you again, do you want it? They just take your money and then they send you the phone, so that's not allowed.
No,
but they've
that's
got
allowed.
access to your thing. They're just giving delivery. The
In
sales.
future sale, we said we need Ijab and Qabul again.
Yeah. This is not a future sale.
I mean, the promise.
There's no promise. This is a sale.
Because the
giving
money
you
has been
details.
out. Yeah.
The sales already happened because
Seller
you've
will
given
know.
him you've given
Card
your side
details
of the
to-
money or the access to your money. It's where there's
So
no
then
access.
the job and call is not happening again.
That's happening right now. That's it. It's not gonna, you don't need it again.
So what's the difference between the phone where you said here you can buy the phone and you can have it in 2 months? If I give you the money for that phone now, and you say to me you can have it in 2 months,
Then sale done.
The sales
Yeah,
doesn't matter about
that's,
the
now
price.
you have rights to that. So even that iPhone, from that date that you've given them access to that phone, no matter when that iPhone's made, you have access to it. That's yours. It's still yours in principle. That belongs to
Yeah,
you.
but technically he hasn't got ownership of it. Though.
You have, because you've given them access from your side. That's owed to you,
But
and
this
they're obliged to give that to
sale
you on that
does
date.
it entails
Already.
the transfer of ownership.
And then there's another thing as well. This, if something's being manufactured, we're going to have another chapter on that. Istisna. You go to a tailor and you say, okay, I want you to make a thobe for me. That's called istisna. So basically, you're paying money. That's different. There's a whole chapter on that. Salam and istisna.
Isn't
So
it the transaction of sale? I mean, is there a condition that ownership has to be transferred,
on what side?
or in order to transaction to be completed?
Of course, automatically the ownership is.
But if it is in future case, the obviously you're saying transaction is done. I've given my card details, but I haven't got the goods yet. I'll get it in future.
Getting ownership and possession are two different things.
But it's not even made yet. So you,
Yes, then if it's not made, then that's another discussion. that's basically istisna. That's not even a normal. None of the normal rules apply. There's different chapters of it. Something's not made. That's why we're going to look at people. You can only sell an item which is in existence. We're going to go through all those conditions. أن يكون مالا متقوما معلوما موجودا مملوكا مقبوضا. 6 conditions. So the item can only be bought and sold if it's in existence. You can't sell an item which is not in existence. Now, there's an exception to that. 2 exceptions. One is istisna. There's a whole chapter on istisna. And one is salam. Istisna is when something is manufactured. There are rules for that. Like I gave the tailor example. That you go to a tailor, you're buying, you're paying the money. Here's £20. You even give them money now. I want a thobe made. That's istisna. There's rules for that. So you're buying something, you're paying for it right now, which is not in existence, which is being manufactured, made, etc. But there are rules for that. So that's not a normal sale. There are different rules.
if you had some cloth and you gave it to the tailor, but you didn't specify, he didn't specify how much it was, and he just made it. And
Then there's 2 things. If you cloth is from them or cloth is from you. If it's cloth is from you, then that's not istisna. That's just hiring. And then the chapter of hiring comes there. So you're just using the hiring services. Depends whose cloth is it. If cloth and everything it's theirs, then that's istisna. If you're giving materials, here, then you're just doing asking them, like you're just hiring for the job. This is how much the job costs. You're giving them all the, you just make it. So,
Have this not be covered that sort of 2 volumes?
so that's different. But when the cloth is even theirs, everything's theirs. They just say to you, look, they just show you a picture. This is the type of phone, etc. We're gonna make it. We haven't made it. This is all the details, everything. And we'll give you a ready-made phone, and you pay for it now. That's istisna. That's allowed. There's some conditions. Istisna is to buy something which is not in existence and to pay it for it. And we'll come to that. Something is not in existence. So let's leave that one for istisna. But imagine the iPhone is in existence. You're ordering a pre-order thing. We'll come to that again because it's not into existence. So we'll look at istisna. Even in here, there's a chapter on istisna. You should try to look at this. Try to read some parts from this book. Look, there's a whole section here. Salam and istisna. Istisna is to get something made for you, to seek the making of something. So that's, but if we're talking about the phone is already in existence, imagine you're ordering a phone, iPhone, which they do have in existence. It's not going to be made. Then these rules will apply. So if you want to order it, they've still got it. So then these rules will apply. Are you doing the sale right now? Most likely in these cases, the sale is right now.
I just want to ask you one final time. Sorry, so if I purchase an item, we agreed a deal.
These guys have no questions online, sorry.
There is one question.
We're going to read online as well. Sorry, we've got over time today.
I paid you, but I agreed to take the item. That's allowed or not?
That's allowed.
So is that not the same as a future transaction?
Future is not when you take and when you pay.
Okay.
So many times we pay or we take later. all the loan transactions are all paying later. It's not when you pay and it's not when you take. Future is that it's going to start at a later date. That thing will be enacted on a future date. But then we need to. That's clearly different. What we're trying to show the difference is that and a promise, because the promise is also going to happen in the future, and this future sale is also going to happen in the future. That's where the trickiness was. These two things resemble. They're both very clear from the current sale. Current sale and future sale, there's clear differences. Current sale and promise, there's clear differences. But what two things resemble one another is a promise and a future sale. And for that, I explained like all the difference is that this will happen automatically. This you will have to do job for more. Here you'll become automatically as time comes on. You'll become indebted. Money, zakat, all these things. This one you'll have to go in a court of law. This will always take place. This sometimes might not take place because one person doesn't want to go in the court, or maybe you might lose the court case, or maybe he has an excuse. So that's why there's these differences between these two.
So going back to the example, even if you give your details, say you want to,
Which example?
so the 1st December something's been released.
I said don't talk about released business. We're only talking about things which are manufactured. Something's in existence. Yeah,
It's in existence.
Okay. It's in existence right now.
Yeah.
When you're so the things in the world, it's in existence. The people who are selling you, they've got it.
Yeah, they've got it.
Okay.
And then you give your details, but there's no transaction, no ownership has happened. So they could just say that, oh, sorry, we couldn't release it. We can't give it to you on that date, and we're not going to give it to you. But when that date comes, 1st December, then they have to give it to you. That's when they legally have, or they have to give it to you.
So basically, you do a deal for the 1st of December, and they could also say before 1st of December, we don't want to sell it to you.
Yeah.
We don't want to sell it to you. We can't sell it to you.
We can't sell it to
Are you registering an interest, or are you actually doing the deal?
you. Actually, they have the pre-order. So when you do a pre-order, you give all your details with the expectation that when on that day, it's going to be delivered to you, your money will come out from your bank. But before that time, that transaction is only done on that day. It's not, you don't have any rights before then to say,
Yeah, you give them the details, your bank details.
No,
you give them the details, but they're not doing anything.
They're not taking it
The
out.
sale hasn't happened, the transaction hasn't happened.
whether they take it or not, that's not the issue. But if the sale is not happening, and then it's either the promise or either future sale.
But if it was a promise, then they would have to ask you again on that
Yeah.
day. And if they don't ask you, then you can't.
No, but when they say order confirmation,
That's when they just sent it. That confirmed. They don't ask you again.
Promise is that you have to agree to it again. You have a right not to go ahead with it, but then they can take you to a court of law. So what about if on that day, a day before, can you not just pull out from it? And if you do, like,
what's the earliest you can cancel if you pre-ordered?
oh, you're saying that they have a right that they can pull out from it.
Yeah.
But you don't have a right to pull out from it. But they have a right to pull out from it.
It's in their terms, basically. isn't it?
Yeah, I
The
don't
terms of the
know
sale.
if the person who's ordering has the right to
But then at the time,
But you just said that they might just say to you, we don't want to sell it to you. So
Yeah.
how can they do that?
we've
That
ran
means-
out of stock. They could say we've ran out of stock.
They could just say there's been
Stock.
we found a safety defect in it, so we can't sell this because there's a safety issue or something.
For me, it looks like a promise, to be honest. It's a kind of a promise, and then you do it. But then there has to be a new job. You have to agree on that day.
But again, you've got rights that if there's a defect to it, but that falls on another category, isn't it? That when the sale's done and then
Yeah,
there's defect.
defect. Forget the defect. If
But you could just say as well, consumer rights, that you don't want it.
Yeah, you can
And
cancel.
you can give it back.
Yeah.
If you can cancel before that time, then it's a promise.
yeah, it's a promise. Then it's clearly a promise. Yeah, you need to agree. It's 9 o'clock.
Yes. That's the question.
Yeah, just ask the question quickly.
This is from last week's lesson. With all due respect, I'm just asking to understand, since rizq is written for us, why must one bother doing business and spending all the time and effort when our provisions will reach us before we die?
We don't know what's written for us. A human being, that's a qadar issue now, the aqeedah issue. A human being has to deal with his life as though there's no qadar. This is what's written, it's all Allah's domain. That's His job, that's for Him to deal with. Qadar is not something for us to deal with. Qadar is all, we just believe in it. It's all for Allah to know, and how He deals with it, that's up to Him. We have to act as though, forget risk, everything in life. Oh, if it was written for me right now that something, I'm just going to sit here now.
I'm not going to go to sleep hungry.
I'm not going to sleep, I'm not going to work, I'm not going to eat, I'm not going to do nothing. If everything's written for me, I'm just not going to do anything in life. I'm just going to sit here. That's it. From now on, until I die, I'm just going to sit here.
Then it was written for him to die.
Then it was written for me to die, so I just
in
die.
3 days.
We can't deal with life like that. Life is like based on, you have to take the means. If you want, someone might just say that, okay, it wasn't written for me not to pray, I just sat here, so then why bother praying? That's how the Jabariya, they looked at sins. They just committed sins and they said it was written for me. You can't deal with life like that. Life is basically, we believe that everything's written, but that's for Allah to deal with. We have to act in this world as though there's no qadar, as though there's no qadar. If I put my hand here, I'll get there. If I put in the effort, I'll get water. If I walk there, then I'll get there. If I don't walk there, then I won't get there. Okay.
Forgive us for